Good afternoon. Your Excellencies, Your Eminencies, ladies and gentlemen, and my friends. One of them already left the room, Paulius, but I thank him also for his contribution. Aurelius, thank you so much for your contribution. Everybody who contributed so far. Professor Mazurkovic, we know each other from the time that you were in Brussels. We met there for the first time and was happy to meet you again here. And also my thanks to our friends of the LVI, the Free Society Institute, for their great job in doing this. Especially my thanks to Diana, who did so much for this event. Thank you so much, Diana. So my name is Johannes de Jong. I'm indeed talking about this. I will try to keep you entertained, but not as in The Gladiator, so don't worry. So we live in a very interesting situation in the Netherlands. And I could already say that basically, just as the previous speaker, I can say that all the previous speakers were an introduction to my presentation, so thank you very much. So, but I will to keep it very practical. So that's also nice, right? Because we had a lot of theory, and before everybody falls asleep, either online or offline, by the way, if you fall asleep online, be aware the coffee should not spill over your laptop. But so I will talk about this very interesting situation that we are in the Netherlands, which has a lot of implications for the common good and also for the common good in Europe. So let me show you something here. In 10 years' time, we went from a surplus on our job market to a shortage. Let me put this in numbers for you. So, in 1 decade, we went from 16 jobs per 100 job seekers to 108 jobs per 100 job seekers. And that will not be the end of it. This is the next stage. Interesting, huh? 390 jobs per 100 job seekers. At least we will have no issues with regard to joblessness, so that's then solved. So that's one problem less. When I grew up, joblessness was the problem in the 1980s. Where I lived, half the men had no job at that time. Happily, things that became better later on. And now we're talking about this. In 4.5 years, because 2030 sounds far away, guess what? It isn't. It's just before the next European Parliament elections. And obviously, we need these men who were sitting here today, we need them back in 2029, just that you know. So, what does it mean? Well, let's make it practical. When we talk about human dignity, when we talk about the common good, right? This is practical. In 2034, we have a shortage of 265,000 more, actually, healthcare professionals. And that's just healthcare. I'm not talking about the police, I'm not talking about education, I'm not talking about transport, I'm not talking about, people in accountancy, in auditing. We'll have not enough auditors, and so on and so forth. Now, this is not just the Netherlands. But what happens in the Netherlands, because of our economic situation, is that we pull already the few healthcare workers that are out there in the rest of Europe, we pull them to the Netherlands. And then you have a crisis here. Central Eastern Europe. Now, we had already a big presentation on Central Europe, so I will not repeat that. By the way, I'm not from this part of Europe anyway, so what can a Dutch guy say about that? Nothing. But I can repeat what your own organizations are saying, and that you have apparently the same problem, but we, in the Netherlands, we make it worse. So, what do? Oh, by the way, I have not the habit of reading for you what you can already read, but in case you have some trouble in seeing this, it's too small, and I can simply say that that there is a report from the European Federation of Public Service Unions that's saying the healthcare sector in Central and Eastern Europe is facing a very serious crisis. But you know that yourself much better than I do. Now, and this already is on the agenda of the European Parliament as well. Now I can have here somebody sitting in the room who can confirm that, but this is communication from the website of the European Parliament, so I guess it's correct, that they discussed this issue in the Strasbourg session of last February, in 10th to 13th of February. And so that's a very small letter, so what I will simply say is that the whole issue of the lack of sufficient number of healthcare workers is on the European agenda. And the funny thing is that they simply say, and here things get funny, oh, it is just there are supply and demand discrepancies, and there is a lack of planning, and there's a lack of forecasting. But they're not talking about this problem. Because that's the actual problem. Because at the moment we can say, okay, you know what, we fixed the whole healthcare workers problem. Well, then we will not have enough police, not enough people in education, okay, then we fix that. Oh, then we have not enough people in healthcare. So I guess that we actually have a very different problem. And the problem is also, again, that this is not seen as a whole. It's not seen from the perspective of common good. It's seen from a very technocratic perspective. Now, the good news is that it's not just so at the European level, it's also so at the national level. So we're all equally stupid, so that's the good news. There's also bad news. So the bad news is it will get worse. So, because, well, now I am 49, so I'm young. Although my brother, 10 years younger than me, disputes that. He thinks that 49 is being old. I hope that the rest of the room here will disagree with that. Anyway, I know that everybody of my age and older will disagree with it, so that's at least for sure. But the point is obviously that the young baby boomers, right? So I'm Gen X, so I'm not baby boomer. So, but the young baby boomer amongst us, they will retire quite soon. And then we will have a real problem, as I already pointed out with the healthcare workers example, because that's just an example. So, and this fits, again, in this broader European trend. So, as Paul has already said, this is the mega problem. This is the mega problem. It's coming from the inside. As several speakers already said, it's coming from the inside. Now, how did we get here? That's the next question. So there is two aspects on that. There's the economic aspect, and there's the aspect of culture. Right? Now, I know that conservatives love to talk about the culture thing, but not so much about the economic thing. So I will also challenge you all a little bit. But don't worry, we're not venturing into socialism, so. But a bit of critical thinking is necessary, because if we only look at one aspect and forget the rest, we forget the whole picture and we end up in the same mistake again. Now, first the cultural aspect. So, a culture of short-term individualism. It's about you now, it's about total personal freedom. Okay, now we will not deny that personal freedom exists, because personal freedom is part of human dignity. That's not a question, that's a fact. So everybody was like, okay, then we just have to have less personal freedom. That's not the solution here. But it needs to be balanced, right? So that's the point. So a culture of short-term individualism, it's about you now. A culture in which family is old-fashioned and children an annoyance, that's of course not very helpful when you're facing these problems. There you see where the common good perspective, the human dignity perspective, is completely thrown out of the window. And you have these restaurants, even in the Netherlands. Oh, no children, you cannot come there with children, because children are an annoyance. Yes, children can be annoying. Yes, it's part of the uneasiness of life. Oh, no, we cannot accept that. Life has to be my personal, complete, perfect freedom. Yeah, but that's a problem, because then you end up in a very problematic situation. So there is a very unbalanced notion in the culture, that it's all about individual choices. Now, let me be clear. The reality is a bit more nuanced. So there's the cultural message, and there is the reality of individual people, which is way more nuanced. So we see that the deliberate childlessness is growing, but there is many aspects to that. And ultimately, it's a small part of the problem, because it's basically an increase of 9%. But there's something interesting here. So what is the highest point? The child decreases the freedom. This is the biggest graph there. Down below, it's more than 50%. The reason for not having children as a deliberate childlessness is like, okay, it limits freedom. Yes, that's true. That's true. Everybody who has kids knows this. Yes, it limits freedom. We have a kid. Yes, it limits freedom. True, true. But there's more to life than that. There's more to life than pure individual freedom. Now I'm a bit mean, because today's conservatives tend to have a different, a kind of a variant of this individualism. Then it becomes about the strong, self-sufficient individual. But we should cut through that. It is just individualism with a bit nice jacket on it, right? Oh, the strong individual. Right, that's still individualism, all right? Maybe the responsible individual, okay? Maybe that's a bit more than that. But this whole idea of the strong, self-sufficient individual is just a kind of pumped up version of individualism. But that pumped up version of individualism does fit with another paradigm that is the actual problem when it comes to the demographic crisis. Because this idea of this strong, self-sufficient individual fits very well with this. This idea of an economy based on the notion it's about you making money for me now. And that's neoliberalism. Still liberalism, neoliberalism. Then in economic sense. It's not about an idea of, yes, you have a company, you need to make profit to sustain and so on and so on, and you sustain families and all that. It's purely about making profit, that's it. It's not about for whom or for what or to what purpose. It's just about making money for the sake of making money. And that has consequences. Because deliberate childlessness, and I'm talking just about the Netherlands here, is just a small part of the current demographic crisis. It's a small part of it. A much bigger part is less children per family. Now, why is that? Why is that? Because if we look, we can see how this has been decreasing again in 10 years. Very quickly, very quickly. Right? So you run from 1.76 children per woman to 1.49. And this is still decreasing, as we can see. This is not increasing, it's decreasing. Now then we really have to look again at the economic thing, right? Because this cannot just be culture. It's very easy. I see there's a lot of baby boomers. I will be honest, at least in the Netherlands, I see a lot of baby boomers. Oh, they should just be more strong, and they should do this and that, because we could do that in the past. And then the generations under me say, yeah, but your houses were cheaper. And there is a correlation between higher housing prices and less children. So we need to see, this is very interesting, right? This is very interesting. So the people who were against this research, against this report, were the Association of Real Estate people. They were saying, oh, this report is complete nonsense. I was thinking, why would they say that? Well, maybe it's not completely according to their own economic interest, but that's just an idea. Because we can even see it in the regions in the Netherlands. Very precise. Where the average number of children per woman is lower, where the housing prices are higher, with a slight deviation in the Bible Belt, but not too much, slight deviation. Because even if you are a believer, you still have to have a house for children, right? So that's a fact. Now, then I come back to this graph, and I take out two specific points that are relevant. And if you count these two together, you see it's actually higher, right? It's the actual economic factor. Work and children are hard to combine. Raising children costs too much time and energy. Now, this is, of course, the graph for people who decide to be without children deliberately. But obviously, these two factors also play a massive role for those who do get children, but say, okay, no more than X. Now, there can be medical reasons, but these are the economic reasons, because the medical reasons will, from one generation to the other, not change that much. But economic do. Right? So, one very important demographer pointed out that the housing shortage works as a contraception. Yeah? So that is a situation in the Netherlands. So the economic insecurity, and this is, I think, something that is underneath that, the economic insecurity, and this is something pan-European. That's a pan-European element. The economic insecurity influences the number of children. So that is something that you also see, for example, in Italy. In Italy, this is a major factor. Oh, I cannot find a house, I cannot find a job, I cannot find economic security, and therefore no children. Now, then then what is the policy approach? Now, the policy approach, I know that you have a government here and that there are people from coalition and opposition in the room. But I tend to think that at least the government here will be hopefully less inept than ours in the Netherlands. And I leave it to the coalition and opposition to discuss that issue here. But we literally have a governmental apparatus that is giving two messages that cannot go together. That cannot go together. The one message is everybody should do more paid work, and the other message is everybody should do more unpaid work. And the question is that I then raise, okay, when can we sleep? And when can we have children? Oh, but the children you send to the, you can send children to childcare. Yeah, right. And there's one little problem. There is not enough people working in childcare for that. They have a lack of personnel there, a shortage of people working in childcare. Now we have to bring our children to a childcare that does not exist in order to help in the healthcare that has a shortage because of the lack of children. You see the problem, I guess. Yeah, it's funny. I know. When you look at it like this, it's funny, but it's actually quite silly, right? Because I'm not talking, so this could be a slapstick, but I'm talking about actual policies. So, and just to make it very clear, 2-3 weeks ago, there was a session of our State Secretary of Social Affairs and so on. And so the outcome of that session was, well, there should be more people taking 2 jobs. And there were people in the room and saying, look, when do we then have time for the children? And they were literally saying, oh, you send them to childcare. And yeah, and there you have it. So, as I said, it sounds like slapstick, but this is like happening in real life here. So, suggestion to coalition opposition here in Lithuania, don't do that. So, then there's another factor. So now I talked about the government. It's easy always to mock the government. And now I will make it a bit more uncomfortable. I will talk about employers. So our employers in our society in the Netherlands, they have a very persistent anti-pregnancy policy. They had that policy already 20 years ago, and now they are wondering where the people are. Right. I hope I do not need to explain to the employers where people are coming from. But sometimes I get the impression, oh, somebody else will solve that later. Yes, that's called short-term thinking. It doesn't work, by the way, because later is always coming very quicker. It's very quickly becoming a now, far more quicker than you realize. And the older you get, the more you realize that. Right? Now, nobody of us is old, so that's a good thing. But we will learn that. So, the problem is also a problem of attitude. The problem of blaming the young generation. And I want to say something about this amongst conservatives. Stop with that, please. Stop blaming Gen Z for everything. That they are weak and whining and so on. Don't do that. Just don't do that. Because it doesn't help. They are there anyway. We better find a constructive way to work together to improve things than to blame. Blaming doesn't solve anything. And we need to recognize that the whole drive of more profit now as the one and only thing, and the one and only core of the economy, is also creating another problem, namely that of burnouts. So, and that comes on top of all the rest I just said. So you were like, okay, that's a big problem. Now there's another problem on top of that. So what is that problem? The problem is the burnout rate, which is increasing. And again, what is happening, the response to that is that it is individualized. It is the mistake of that individual. It is not seen as a problem coming out of our society. It's just a weak Generation Z. They should be stronger. But that's not a solution. Simply shouting to people they should not have a burnout is not taking people out of the burnout, all right? Just for everybody who doesn't know that, hereby. So, and we see that more women become victim of that than men. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because women are more responsible than men. That's why. So the idea that a burnout comes out of weakness is by definition wrong, because usually it's the more responsible people that get burnout first. So, we need to fix some things on a very fundamental level. We cannot go on with this short-term thinking. Not in the Netherlands, not in Vilnius, not in Europe. It doesn't work. And oh yeah, for the member of European Parliament here and the members of European Parliament, I know you two agree with me on this one. Immigration is not a quick fix here. I read something of the Martin Center, it's the think tank of the European People's Party. It was like demography solution immigration. Right. No, it isn't. And there's nothing wrong with these immigrants as people. Let me absolutely emphasize that. And I'm not talking about the irregular immigration. We can do something about irregular immigration, by the way. Stop funding extremism. I think that would be the nice first step. But then we need to have a presentation about Iraq and Syria and so on, and let's not do that now. But that would be a nice, interesting topic for next time, who knows. Anyway, immigration is not a solution. Immigrants can be hard workers. I respect them if they come here and work hard for. But it's not a solution. And it's also not a solution for us in the Netherlands, because what is happening, people from Central Europe coming to the Netherlands, living then in the most abject, horrible circumstances that's absolutely dehumanizing, an inhuman situation, contrary to human dignity, therefore contrary to the common good. We cannot accept that in Europe, and therefore immigration is not a solution. So, but we still have this problem. So we just checked what is not a solution, we still have the problem. Now, I will show you the most popular political solution. This is the most popular political solution. I can tell you, this is a very popular one. Because the left does not want to talk about families, and the right does not want to talk about the economy. So the left does not want to talk about left liberalism as a factor, cultural factor, in having less children. And the right does not want to talk about neoliberalism, short-term economic philosophy, as a major factor. But we need to talk about both, and we need to take both into consideration without falling in the trap of socialism, obviously, just to make that very clear. Well, you will understand that this is not my solution. So, and let me be clear on this, because I see this here and there in these Christian magazines. Literally, there was a Christian magazine talking about the demographic crisis in Germany and saying, oh, people should simply go back to the church. That would solve things. Now, I want people to go back to church. Thank you very much. Let me be clear on that. But it will not solve this. Not like that. Oh, people should simply go back to the traditional situation of the 1950s. Well, not your 1950s, our 1950s, for all clarity. But the thing is that I understand this wish. It's a bit of nostalgia, but it's a wish. It's not a solution. And people are completely entitled to have that wish, to say, this is our cultural ideal, fine. But the point is, it's not a solution, it's a wish. So what is more in the direction of a solution? Now, in my opinion, in how we try to operate, is to make it clear that we need to put human dignity and the common good in the center of both government and economy and culture, right? So, what is that? Well, human dignity has just been explained sufficiently. I don't need to repeat that one. But common good, let me make it clear. Common good, life, family, community, right? What we as Sallux always say is we have a relational understanding of human dignity. That's the core of the common good. That's the core of what we try to achieve as organization. And that's all about this. And then this becomes the purpose of our economy instead of a higher profit in the next quarter. Now let me be clear. Yes, companies need profits. Otherwise they are not companies, they cannot survive. That's an obvious thing. But the point is, what do we see as the purpose of our economy? And also, maybe, in some cases, what is the purpose of our companies? We can do it in different ways, but that's not the point. And the point here is, what is the purpose of our economy as a whole? So I have this nice book here. In essence, the economy is about life. In essence, the economy is about life. It's written by two economists in the Netherlands, one of our publications, for all clarity. So that's a nice example. And also, the next thing, very important, this. Recognition in economic policy that care, unpaid work and family are already the silent bedrock of our economy. Failure to do so, failure to recognize this, is self-defeating. Let me give you an example. So when they said, the people of these civil servants of our government, oh, but there should be more people brought to childcare, what they actually meant is, bring the children to your grandparents, which is indeed the biggest pool of childcare in our society. Now that assumes, first of all, that everybody is living close to her parents, which is not always the case, not in our case in any case. And secondly, that obviously these grandparents are always there to do that. Now, both is kind of, an assumption, but you can see here one thing. Basically, oh, you have no paid job anymore. Now you will take care for the economy in another way. You will liberate people to work. You will do your job, your unpaid job, by liberating people to do a paid job. But we just don't say that. So actually there is a recognition, but not said. And we should say it. We simply should say it, because this is not just true in the Netherlands, this is true everywhere. So, and also another very simple truth. We often forget. And of course, if you are the CEO of, say, Tesla, just to name a company, or CEO of, Amazon, right? You don't need to think about how people live. But us, we think about our society. We take responsibility for our society. In Europe, in national level, we need to remember sometimes very simple truths. So, some options, considerations, and not everybody needs to agree with me. These are more personal reflections. So I will read this out, don't worry. So in the Netherlands, there is a growing realization that we do not need companies that do not add real value to our society. We do not need companies that dump the costs in the society, dump migrant workers sleeping in the woods, literally. These companies we simply do not need. What will we do? Probably we work through a system of, cutting off the permits to build and so on. So this is one way. That means that some companies will maybe go to other parts of Europe. Well, that's a good thing. So we will need much less marketing, communication, and compliance. We will retrain these people. And this is also something that needs to be done on all of Europe. Finally, governments can choose to have a different tender policy. So give companies that have more long-term perspective more preferential treatment, such as small and medium enterprises, family businesses, mutual cooperative based companies. The point is to encourage a different economy. And I want just something that may happen. This is more like a kind of sense of where things are heading. We see that the salaries in the Netherlands are driving so high that the number of companies is already like, okay, we cannot pay that anymore and stay profitable. Well, in some cases, there is already a tendency to say, okay, you know what? It's not about getting more profit, it's just that everybody can get a salary from this company, and that's the whole purpose. So it becomes more like a team project. So it changes the nature of companies. Well, if that's good or not good, I'd leave it to you, but this is something that I see happening. In any case, so, if we want to deal with the demographic crisis in Europe, we will have to realize that it is indeed about securing human dignity and to secure, therefore, the common good. Thank you.